circumstances of leadership. Before we get into our discussion tonight, I just need to cover a couple of housekeeping details. For the duration of the call, all of the lines are muted, just to preserve the conversation, right? Keep us from having too much background noise. But if you'd like to comment or ask a question of our presenter, please do use the chat box that's to the right of your screen. Also, there may be those of you who are joining us for the first time, and I would love to just introduce you to the coalition, who we are and what we do. The National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated is a 40-year-old advocacy organization, and our vision is that Black women and girls will live in a world where socioeconomic inequity does not exist. We advocate on behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership development and gender equity in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. Our chapter, the Manhattan chapter, was chartered in 1992, and we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. Before I turn it over to Shantae Chambly, who is the chairperson for the Public Policy Committee, I want to thank Dr. Lee for joining us for this important conversation, and I'm very excited to see and hear her presentation, which will be moderated by our immediate past president, Dr. Sonia Banks. Shantae?
Good evening. I would like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Laurinette Lorraine Lee. Dr. Laurinette Lorraine Lee is a public historian specializing in teaching, advocating, and diverse community and academic audiences. She received a BA in communications from Mundane College, now a part of Loyola University, Chicago, an MA in American History from Virginia State University, and a PhD in American History from the University of Virginia. She was the funding curator of African American history at the Virginia Historical Society, now the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. Her book, Making the American Dream Work, A Cultural History of African Americans in Hopewell, Virginia, was commissioned by the Hopewell City Council. She has taught as an adjunct lecturer at Old Dominion University, Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia Union University, John Tyler Community College, and the University of Richmond. She became a full-time lecturer at UR in 2018 and currently directs a historical research project that examines previously neglected areas of institutional history. Dr. Lee consults with museums, churches, and community organizations and serves on several boards and commissions.
Thank you so much, Shantae. We are so excited to be here talking to Dr. Laurinette Lee, who, while I read your bio, because I've known you in Richmond, I remain fascinated by your work and commitment to not only step into the legacy of our historical journey as Africans in America, but to stay in the space where you were born and raised, in a community that you know and that knows you, and to just understand the context of Dr. Lee's ability to weigh in on today's topic on sex, policy, and politics, and the compelling nature of leadership. Know that she understands the origin of many things in many places, but even the origin of her name. And I remember having the pleasure of living in Virginia, where Dr. Lee resides now, and understanding that she knew that her ancestors, if I recall this incorrectly, correct me, actually came from the General Lee's plantation. Is that correct?
In that vicinity.
In
Yes.
that vicinity. So it is quite a rare opportunity. This was before Ancestry.com was popular and everybody was looking it up, to be able to know that you are in the vicinity, right, of those that have either owned or aligned or misaligned our outcomes in our lives. So thank you so much for this time. Let's just jump in. This is an unusual time that we are living in, right? So that proverb, may you live in unusual times. We need to add and uncertain times and blissful times, chaotic times. We're right dead smack in the middle of it. And today's conversation is around leadership and public leadership at that. So when we talk about it, just to put a bit of a framework around our conversation, I really want Dr. Lee to tell you a bit about her journey and story as she has decided and I think answered the call, the clarion call, as we hear from our politicians in New York, to respond to this internal drive or need to be present for those that are unable to speak for themselves. And that is our little ones, our little Black girls and boys, as well as everyone else in the complexity of identities and personalities and races and cultures in Virginia. So tell us a bit about what you're about to embark on, and then let's get into the conversation retrospectively of how you got here, how you decided to say yes to this level of civic leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Banks. And thank you all members of the Coalition of 100 Black Women and all guests here this evening. I appreciate your being. I recently have been called to serve on the school board here in Chesterfield County, Virginia. And that's the county where I was born, raised, attended school, and left immediately after because I wanted to find myself, as many of us do at that age. And so I lived in Chicago for a while. I lived in Atlanta. And when I returned in the 80s, I saw that they were not, I began substitute teaching. And I saw that they were not teaching differently from when I was in school. And so I decided to pursue a master's degree. And then I went on for a PhD. And it's been calling me. I became the founder curator of African American history at the Virginia Historical Society, and that's now called the Virginia Museum and Culture. And I was there, what they would call minority intern. I never saw myself as a minority. I recognized how others saw me, though. But once I completed that intern and went on to the PhD program, I always had this fascination with public history. And then when this position at the Historical Society was created, they reached out to me. It was an eye-opening experience. I was there for 15 years and left on my volition. When I reached that magic age of 59, when you could be out of that 401k without that extra tax hit, that was a jubilation day for me. That was a lot, but historians talk a lot. But
No, that's fine. And we are having a little challenge. Your voice is going in and out. So try if you can. You may see a finger go up. It just means we need you to repeat it. I know in the journey being the only African American female in that museum, historical society, what was that like in terms of getting you ready for the steps you're going to take now in your civic leadership?
that 15-year journey was a heavy load up a steep mountain. It's hard to be in a place when you know you're not really appreciated or valued. But it's the same experience I'd had when I was in the fourth grade and I went into what we called the white school and was the only Black child in the class. You know when you're not wanted somewhere. And so being at the Historical Society, though difficult, was anything I had experienced before. It toughened me up. And then when I left in 2016, um, I started, I had already been adjuncting at the University of Richmond, and then I became full time. And I was fortunate enough to direct a history research project where we looked at slavery, race, and segregation, areas that they had not ever looked at before, to really flesh out that history. We completed that study last year, and now the campus community is grappling with this new knowledge and how to incorporate it into the curriculum and the landscape. And so now, as I move forward and begin my campaigning for the school, um, it's it's not unfamiliar territory in some ways, but in other ways, very new territory and a calling that initially I was, but I'm going in.
So tell us about that, because I remember having a conversation as you were trying to determine, and for those of us that are listening, when you're trying to determine, can I add this new thing to my life? Can I go into politics? And if we break down your decision making, and for today's conversation, let's start with the sexuality of it, not just the gender, but the fact that as Black women in political space, we are sometimes seen iconically, right? That we either have the tough fighting, Shirley Chisholmness of it all, or are we coming in, with another type of, stereotype around who and how we are, and how does that impact our own thinking about aspiring in the role? So, talk a bit about what, and I know there was a scene, a scenario that got you to really think about stepping up in civic leadership this way? And how do you see the relationship of your decision to what's going to happen and be the impact of being a woman, a Black woman, on that school board?
Well, in the world, women are stereotyped. And then when we look at the southern part of the United States, where so much of the history is rooted in slavery, um, Black women are seen as this superwoman, that they could bear children and then be in the fields working the next day, that they did not experience pain. And we know from history that medical doctors experimented on Black women without anesthesia. Um, and it was felt that when their children were taken from them, that they did not experience any pain. So there's all of those stereotypes. And just recently, I was talking with a friend of mine, a white female, and she said, well, we're here to help you, but we know you don't really need any help. All of us need help.
Right, right, right.
And so it's those kinds of stereotypes that is constant in our lives that we have, listen to and work through, and as much as possible to be true to ourselves, be as authentic. When we hurt, no. When we're tired, we need to say, I need space.
Right, right, to
It's
be
so,
able to do that.
it's so easy to take on things because the need is so,
Hmm.
but we have to learn too to say, I need to take care of myself.
Right. So what made you decide to do this? You have a very fulfilled career, right? I mean, you could stop now, write more books, sell more books, just stay a professor. What made you decide to go into one of the most, I want to say, contentious, but not the most contentious school boards in Virginia and be the first, is it not, of a Black woman to ever be on that school board, unless our legacy has something from before those times? and create this space, this legacy, using your identity and your ability? What made you decide to do this?
I don't know that I'm the,
Okay.
and really, I don't want to burden myself. But what I do know is that there is a need,
Yeah.
and I'm qualified. I would not feel right
Yes.
at the end of the day, at the end of my life, knowing that I've been asked to step up, and I said no. When the
Mm.
need, when we
Yeah.
look at the disciplinary rates toward our children, we have to ask, why is that? Where are the acts
Mhm.
of our children? What are the policy
Mhm.
procedures in place that needs to be addressed? When we look at the recruitment and retainment of teachers of color, why don't we have more? And how can we provide the resources that are needed, not only for them, but also so that they can teach in culturally diverse classrooms?
Yeah.
I just, there's this, the need is too great. And just actually, just a
Yeah.
few months ago, I was speaking with a church in Richmond, and it's a white congregation that's very invested in racial reconciliation and reparations. And I suggested to them that one way to get involved is to look at the education system and look at who's sitting on who
Mhm.
enter into that to make a difference. And lo and behold, the universe and Catherine, who came to me and asked me to consider sitting on the board, came to me and this is your moment. You got to walk it, talk it.
That's
So
it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's how it happens, right? This whole sense of you are thinking and asking others, and then the opportunity comes straight to you. So now you are in the position compelled by the need, right? Identifying and very familiar with the impact of your identity on this board and with these people. These are people you've grown up with and you understand. What do you imagine or consider to be the most important decisions that you're going to need to make when you come on that board, or the most important things to be mindful of?
well, I'd say one of the first things that I want to go in and do is listen and hear what the concerns are. Where are there areas that need to be addressed immediately? Why are we having issues with whatever it is, and what can be done about it? This particular board is a five-member board, all white. And I am not sure how culturally sensitive they are. So that's one of the things I want to look at immediately. And I also want to look at the concerns, not just of students, teachers, parents, and administrators, but the staff, the
Yeah,
cafeteria workers, the bus drivers, the,
yeah,
that many consider marginal, but actually are essential personnel.
yeah, yeah. And don't get considered when you're thinking about the children, the teachers, and the dynamics of the bureaucracy. You're not thinking about all those other members of the community of the school that make up the school and the culture of the school, right? We all remember when we were there. I can tell you what was happening with the, environmental services. We called them maintenance and custodians back then, and the teachers' aide in the hall, and all the people that helped to bring what I call the theater of school together, right? And the impact of that. So that's so important. These are the critical areas. And I can imagine on the school board, and I don't know how many of you are listening have ever been on the school board before or served in civic leadership. I know Shantae serves on a community board. That you don't get a manual that is actually going to accurately walk you through what you can expect, right? As the people show up and ask the questions, and I'm assuming you have a meeting, right? At times when people are invited in, you are in that position where you're considered the expert, right? In terms of the administration and understanding the bureaucracy that's impacting their children. And when parents show up, they want answers right away. Anything coming in that's new and innovative, you're bringing science or you're bringing data. And so there's this concern around how do you balance your ability to show up and care with your ability to plan and innovate and strive. It's that way of being with the people, for the people, and yet thinking ahead and looking at the processes that are going to be needed, even when they don't see it themselves. What do you think will be the toughest challenges? And I know you worked on boards before, we all have. We could probably list them with you. But as an internal journey going from a private life to what will be a public life, right, which we never talk about a lot, what do you think the internal hurdles or the external challenges will be that you want to be mindful of or have support for as you become this board member?
Well, actually, I think the biggest hurdle or challenge will be maintaining self-care, making sure that that is a priority, because it is so easy to get caught up in what needs to be done, especially when so much needs to be done. And it's wearing on the spirit to keep pushing when you're not taking care of yourself. You're not getting enough sleep. You're eating on the run. You don't exercise. You don't take time to reflect or meditate or pray
Right.
because you got to get this done. Got to, like being on the trail. So
Mm-hmm.
I really see that as a hurdle that I want to be mindful of
Right.
at all times. And it's easy to say that, but it's important to have people to remind you.
Yeah. Yeah, of that piece. And when you talk about self-care, just to move it into even another slice of reality, often when we're on these boards and we are the only one, right? And especially now, we're going into 2022, 2023, there is this pull or draw to want to educate, your colleagues on the board. When someone's asking a question and you're going, my Lord, my Lord, my Lord, that's like 5 grades ago. Somebody stood in front of you, taught you that, and you did. So you are getting this pull to not only represent and take care of the parents and the children, but also when there's this opportunity in your mind, and you're a professor, you teach, to say, I can't even go forward with my response to the question or the observation without giving it some context. And then before you know it, you're off and teaching. And I often say, now that's not a part of my job description. Now, when I get to that part, I'll include you. But right now, teaching my peers about these things that are important in the pedagogy of race and identity and culture and sex for learning, I don't know if I'm supposed to be going this way, teaching to my left and right. I'm okay going that way, right, with the parents and the children. How are you going to negotiate that? Because there are days when you talk about self-care, you come home more whipped about the fact that you had to entertain crosstalk and no one came in with any help. And you're like, I spent 30 minutes trying to convince this person. So when you talk about self-care, how do you imagine, or are there strategies you've used in other places that are going to protect you from that? Because that's the first thing I think of when I'm on a board. And all of you are listening who've been on boards. Again, Shantae, you're on a board. What is it that you do to protect yourself around that?
Well, I can have a conversation, and so I can hear from you all because I don't know all the. I know what I have done in the past, and it works. Maybe something more that I can. And I know for me, oftentimes in board meetings, either it gets off track. I'll pull back and listen and observe, watch the body, listen to what's said and what's unsaid. Look at the alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And many times say, Dr. B, so quiet, you haven't said anything. What do you think? And I'll say, I'm thinking.
Right, right.
And sometimes that scares people because they're not accustomed to some being quiet, particularly Black people, particularly Black women.
Yeah.
That's a dangerous thing.
Ah, fascinating. Yes.
Yes.
The tool of using silence as an indicator, right, as a catalyst to actually maneuver and get some rest from that onslaught of you're here to now teach me too.
Yeah.
And so the silence is a support. That makes sense. I know I heard something at one of our coalition national meetings from a person in the equity diversity space at Coca-Cola when she was experiencing that very famous "you say it," and then someone else says it as if it's their idea, right? This phenomenon's been studied now, very popular. And so she says, "Thank you for illuminating my point."
Yeah.
Right, and it brings the attention to the fact that they did, right, they illuminated, they amplified it, but that point you are joining with them to say, I hear you agreeing, and now we're a duo in this understanding. And so I want everyone to know that we are working in partnership around that way of thinking. But these maneuvers that that we do in our skill set can actually cause a little fatigue that comes on as an extra piece of being in this gender space and being in this race space. Let's shift a little bit to the impact of power. We're talking about sex, our identity, the way we get seen. What is it? You're either the Jezebel or you're the mammy, right? Or you're the what was the other one? The house cleaner. There were these three roles, right? Very popular in our historical understanding of how Black women got framed, and we have busted out of many of them, but yet unconsciously, they still are there. And so, when you're speaking, what is being heard may be through those lenses. And the call to defend yourself is what I hear you protecting. And I want to support you on that, Dr. Lee, because it does take that kind of quiet patience to understand that where your value is in not responding as often as it is responding. So talk
Well,
about
let me say, responding when necessary,
yes, yes,
something to say, not
right,
just being quiet just to be quiet, but listening. And when there is something that needs to be said, say it.
yeah.
Oftentimes, you're the person who
Yes, yes,
speak from that experience.
yes, yes. And how do you know, right? There are times when you're waiting. Is it my turn? I've talked so much, but you'll know, no, this is important. And the
Yes.
power dynamic, there's a kind of way, and again, we've been in a lot of places, everyone listening has, and I want to invite you all to start asking questions in a few minutes. But we've been in places where you have equal title, but you don't have equal power,
Mhm.
right? You're the new person on the board. And so generally there's this sense of my time will come. I'm learning. I'm going to be, adapting and understanding my role and my function. But how are the power dynamics in your area, in your community in the South? How do they play out politically? And to what extent do you think you might encounter that in this new role?
Well, there are more Black women in politics now, all
Good.
over, and
Yes,
particularly here.
everywhere, everywhere.
Yeah, and here in Virginia and Richmond, uh,
Yes.
they are in visible place with authority, power,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
and so that collective energy is something to build upon
Yes.
and use to propel me forward. Well,
Yeah. Yeah. You're not alone. I mean, we have a YouTube clip and we'll try to get it out to you that just kind of builds on the momentum of the energy that you're not alone. That there are more, Black women entering into the civic and political arena because some argue everything's political. Every decision you make it's going to impact the families and children in your county for generations, long after you've transitioned, right? The person who was able to get fill in the blank because you actually voted in a different direction and were able, hopefully, to get the allyship that we speak about so often in our current lexicon for our freedom and liberation, and that allowed something to get passed that had been able to be passed before. How do you define or view power and the power politic? How do you look at it, Dr. Lee, when you think about your role, and how do you define it for yourself when someone talks about power and they reference you?
Well, people have said that I have quiet power. I don't speak a lot, but when I speak, I have substance.
Yes.
I think for me, though it's an evolution, it's something that sits well in my soul. I don't need to be flashy
Yes.
or, to really push it on people.
Yes. Yes.
My skin. And, I come to you just as I am. You deal with me.
There you go. There you go. And that's power, right? This is the diversity of power. It's like we're changing the landscape of how Black women are stereotyped.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one way strong. It's deal with me. I don't have to work at it. I'm not trying to prove anything. And while the game may look political to you, it has a completely different spiritual calling. I heard you talk about praying and the power of that. And let's bring that in a bit, because when we talk about power, we always think about it as this external resilience that's demonstrated and measurable and expected. How is the internal power going to be working? And I know self-care will be an element, but what do you imagine that to look like throughout these stages as you ascend into this role?
Well, I remember even in the fourth grade, being that only Black child in the classroom of white children, being on the plays with you, I began to develop this inner strength.
Yes.
I remember when I was in Chicago, I uh, had just graduated Underline, a Catholic women's college, and uh, fortunate enough to land a position at Wall Street Journal advertising sales. That was
Okay.
then that I had no idea that they wanted a quota. They wanted to fill a quota. Yet when they were about to close an office, they needed to move their man back to Chicago. I was the last hired, the first fired.
Oh,
It
wow.
was a lot for them to do that. And it was hard as hell to stay there. I wanted to quit. But
Yes.
my family, everyone said, stay, be, be in it because it's going to make you stronger. And then at the Historical Society, before I would go into work, even sitting in the parking lot, I would pray. And so when I came in, I was fully suited up with armor,
I hear you.
with the people call them aggressions, but it's the daily, you know, uh, colleagues not speaking,
Yes. Wow.
saying good morning, even.
Hmm.
Uh, the things that would be done on a daily basis to try to minimize, diminish you. Those I relied on my faith.
Yes.
And when I say that, some man in the sky,
Right. Right.
but this faith that comes from an internal
Yes.
that's very much our ancestors, very much about a spiritual uh, um, respite from
Mm. Yes. Yes, and I hear it. I mean, I can envision it. We all know it. Let me open it up to those that are here. Janera, Nancy, I see you on. I know there was Catherine was on. Talk a bit or ask a question, if you would, about something you're hearing Dr. Lee says that resonates with where your power comes from, how you understand your agenda, and then the nature of the politic. When you're talking about going into an office, nobody talking to you, and we're not just talking about a little incident that happened. We're talking about a culture of, annihilating your identity through silence, right? A place that is actually designing a method to derail and distract you and your ability to internally do what was necessary. And I think that shows exactly how we can expect you to operate on the school board. Any questions are coming up, Janelle? I see you come on the screen for Dr. Lee about this compelling
Yeah.
role to go into this very challenging and interesting leadership opportunity.
And I think that we often don't make that significant connection between our history and what we want to ultimately do, or how that the history and the ancestors absolutely do compel us forward into what our mission and our vocation, right? And our purpose will ultimately be. And, before we started, I was saying to Dr. Lee that I was a huge fangirl even before I started, even before she started her presentation and I got to hear it, because and appreciated her work as a public historian and the depth and richness of what she has done to educate others, right, through her work, but what that does to you personally when you understand who you are and where you come from. And so it's not a huge stretch of the imagination when we see that the larger culture has incredible connections to who they are and where they come from, and that our lack of those connections in understanding who we are as a people, only really knowing our history post-colonialism, not understanding that we were once kings and still are kings and queens, in other ways, and we may have made these stops along the dropped off on different ships and what have you. But the bottom line is, when you know that, and you are confident in that, and you recognize that term, the shoulders on which you stand, right? And you realize that they made it. They made it. And we're not in the bottom of a boat, although it may feel like that sometimes, that we are at a time when we have an opportunity to do a lot more and make these really significant contributions in the way that Dr. Lee is taking it on. And we can say yes, because we have the ability. We have the support of the community, of the ancestors, of everyone. And I just need to make that connection, because as I was saying, as I do my own family history, that's somehow made me feel like, and of course in the last 3 years or so, bringing my authentic self, and the ability to bring my authentic self to my experience, my daily life, my work life, is incredibly important to my personal well-being, my engagement as an employee, my ability to be a good mother to my children, a good friend to my girlfriends. I mean, it's everything. So, that's what I hear. And I don't know if we always make the connection for ourselves and other people. I'm not saying everybody needs to go out there and figure out what their family history is and join, ancestry.com, but certainly that's what I see and I hear and I appreciate from Dr. Lee's experience. And it's deep and impactful.
Yeah, well said. And it can compel you to do things that you didn't think you'd do, to lead in spaces and places and times that you might not.
Right.
Well said. I mean, Dr. Lee, what are you taking away from what you hear Janera saying? And I don't know if there are others on the same thread with that. What are you hearing?
Thank you, Janera, because oftentimes we think, oh, we got to join ancestry.com, we got to do this and that. But you actually do very basic searches initially. Talk with the elders in your family before they leave, because that's like a library, a walking library. Get as much information as you can, and document it. If it's recording or writing or something, and get our young people, our young members of the family engaged in that also. I when I think about my self-identity, self-esteem, I think about Dina Lee. She was born in 1809, great grandmother on my father's side. Free Black woman. And when free Black woman, you know how my head goes back. Free Black. And
Yes.
the spirit that
Yeah.
that's the spirit when I enter a room. Free Black woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one reason why I never pursued tenure. I don't
Mm.
jump through hoops and
Yeah.
sit on committees that I don't really feel anything. I don't want to be in that cycle of publish or perish. I want to teach because I enjoy it, and I want to serve in the community, not because it looks good on the resume, but because that's part of my DNA. And it gives me a stronger foundation to be able to do what I want, but also know what I'm doing is of some and larger purpose in the world. And a free Black woman can do that.
That's it. And when you think about the, and I love it, the free Black woman. Every time I say free, I'm gonna want to throw my head back now, Dr. Lee. But I think about as a coalition is dedicated to Black women and girls, right? That you're going to be in this position where you'll be a role model, right? To little Black girls and maybe big Black girls or women, parents that are there, looking at you and a guiding presence on how to model themselves, their tone, how to approach these difficulties, not just in education, but all kinds of places. And we get the distinguished honor of being role models without even asking permission. You know, often Black women are reminded wherever you go, you're modeling something, right? Whenever space you step in, you are. So, how is that in terms of as you think about your great grandmother and this unbelievable, compelling role you're taking? What comes to mind that you want Black girls to get or understand as they watch you lead, as they watch you practice your self-care in full view with your peers, and as you watch them, what would you like Black girls to learn from this process and this dedication that you're stepping into?
That you are worthy of the best there, and you have opportunity to make it happen. And you have people around you that support you. You have opportunity for an education, and you have the right, decent education. And I'm here to get that.
Yes, yes,
None of the sloppy stuff.
yeah,
Our all children, our children deserve the best education that they can get. It's shameful. I know I'm going into the preacher mode.
that's okay. Go ahead.
That we have schools that are crumbling,
Mm,
that children have to wait until they get to school before they can get something to eat.
yeah, yeah,
We can do better, and
yes,
we do better.
yes.
And we must make sure that our children, particularly our girls in this situation, don't take on the burden of doing too much and
Hmm.
sacrificing themselves.
Right. And thinking that they're the reason why something's wrong with me, because if something was right with me, I would have food. If something was right with me, I would have people that look like me teaching me the best that I could have. And so those messages get internalized very early on. I think you are spot on when you talk about, and we must do better. So as a part of that process, I think when we heard Janera and both of you talk about this internal force, this historic energy, I think a lot of people don't understand that our power to deal with the politics of life and the politics of being black, female, having a sexuality, having a preference that may not agree with others, but I'm going to talk about it, comes not just because we've been on the planet, but because we're standing in for the people that came before us. And as I see your role, Dr. Lee, the ones that will come after you, the future historians, right? And professors and teachers. And your way of understanding your community is a little unique. And I want to step into this space because it's a different way of looking at politics. And again, those of you here, put things in the chat if you have questions and offer any kinds of observations that you have. Please come off mic. But I know one of the ways that I met you in Richmond, you were actually visiting these smaller communities, right? These landmark sites, some of them not yet landmarks, where Africans in America either lived or worshiped or went to school, little tiny schoolhouses, and you were giving talks about things that included the clothing that we had to wear when we were not free and how it would scratch our skin. And you talked about, right, what and how the relationships were between those who owned us and those that were children that had to work there. And it was just telling that you had this, on the road kind of spirit around educating in the area. And I don't know if these were just people calling you were going to speak, but it looked like you were a sojourner trying to make sure you got the good news out about the reality of this paradigm that you're now shifting generations later. And so I see you as a forerunner of a lot of the truth that's yet to come. If you were to look back and say, I don't know, 5 years from now, right, or more, at your decision to become a school board member in the South during this time, right, when the world's turning upside down and, Omicron and Delta just had a baby, when you are absolutely stepping into this uncertainty, what would you like to be able to have said about you and your legacy and your work when you look back and say, yeah, that was me, that's what I did? What would you like people to say about your work? And what would you think is important?
I suppose the simplest thing, she did it. She made a difference. She
She
made,
did it.
and I do hope that I will be a voice for those who have been on the periphery. I don't think of them as marginalized. I know that that is how the world considers them and names them. But for me, they're not marginal. That's a part of me.
Mm,
When I think about being the only Black child in a classroom of white students, and as a bisexual woman,
yes,
I'm able to really give voice to the experience of people who have been considered marginal.
yes,
But if I don't use my voice, what am I here for?
yeah, yeah,
But my education and experience, all this will be for naught. And I could
that's right. That's right.
I cannot live with myself not doing everything that I can.
Wow. Talk about compelling. I mean, when I listen to you, it feels like you're getting ready to take your oath right now and step on in and be committed because I can hear the spirit of the destiny, right? That you see yourself reaching and achieving. And they say, write the vision, make it plain. And if you can see it, you can believe it. And right now, I am looking back with you at I did it. She did it. as a phrase. So let me invite some more people to talk, because I'm just mesmerized. Often each of us, I believe, and those that are listening in the Facebook world, have had opportunities brought to us or heard of them. And you say on the periphery, you move, oh, I can't do it, I don't have time to do it. But you'd be amazed what your soul can expand to when it needs to be done, and I know we have our Madam President on here, and she has expanded her soul multiple times, right? When it needs to be done, people say that about yoga. I do it because it must be done, right? And that's the self-care. We do have a question in here from Madam President. How can Black women best serve the interests of parents and children in deciding on policy? For example, sex education is discussed with regard to opposing and supporting beliefs, public opinion, and impact on politics and policies, and controversial topics like abortion and LGBTQ rights. How are we going to venture into these spaces that I hate to say the South isn't that far behind? People like to say, oh, South's behind. Not as behind as we think, right? When the truth is told. So how do Black women best serve the interests of parents and children in deciding the policies that actually are going to encompass all of our understanding about our roles and our identities?
That's interesting because usually it's Black women who have brought to the fore issues that people have died from. I think about
That's right.
Annie Lou Hamer,
That's right.
Ella Baker, many others
Yes.
stepped up and showed out.
Yes.
And I think when we think about Black women, parents and teachers, and many of the issues for now, well, for my, I know I intend to go in to listen
Yes.
because first of all, I people will say, well,
Mm-hmm.
how does she know how we feel as parents? I don't know, but I know how I was a child. And I know how children feel, but I want,
Yes.
therefore, want to listen. I want to hear
Yeah.
different perspectives. I want parents to be in community so that they can listen to each other rather than stereotype or a
Right. Right. And go to the weakest kind, the conflict.
yeah,
Because there's another opportunity, right? As a leader, we don't always think about when you're on the school board, you can actually teach parents different ways of learning, listening, working together, solving problems. It doesn't have to just be about this kind of information download and bureaucratic perspective, and the policy can come from them. How
yeah,
many of us have been asked to be involved in writing the policy that our school runs by? Very few, right? But there's nothing to stop your input in the process and it be really literally measurable, right? Flip charts up, or you get on your phone, vote for this or write this. It can be a kind of like whole, synod around policy writing. So to your question, Madam President, I think that allows the politic of making policy to shift from a power differential to an empowered parent, sitting, and so they can feel the experience of it.
yes, get
Good,
involved.
good.
Those PTA
Yeah,
meetings, very important. And one of the first things I do once I start campaigning is go on listening tours. I want to go
nice.
to the schools to hear parents' concerns and teachers and the custodial workers. I want to listen because that's the best way to be able to bring about some change.
Yeah. And you have an open field, I think is a little different from us in New York, because you're not unionized, right? There aren't any unions, and so you're really looking at education and its kind of pure, kind of naked way of being adjusted, and structures aren't there that are already in place to either protect or can be interpreted as, be barriers to liberation of thought or how things are actually done. So you're in a real opportunity, and the board probably will have that as a opportunity themselves to consider. And I love the idea of the listening, see if we can get some clarity to shift the future of education in the county. This
And
is amazing. I know we're coming up on, say again?
one of the things I learned about myself, my strength is in listening. And
Yes,
so that's what I lead with.
nice.
And I learned that early on in life because you learn so much more. My grandmother used to say, if you don't know what to say, be quiet and listen, and it'll come
Mhm.
to
Yes, it will come to you. Yeah, my grandmother said you got two ears and one mouth. Figure it out. Do the math. What do you think you're supposed to be doing more of, right? So I'm still working on that, but I do like it when and I can lay back when I think that there's something really empowering going on, like this conversation. Everyone, we are at the last couple of minutes. If you have any thoughts, please put them in the chat, or take yourself off mute, because leadership is hard. And we talked about sex, power, politics, and the compelling nature of it, because something has to inspire you every day to get up. And I think I'd like to leave with you having the final word, Dr. Lee. If you had to think of one word that will keep you compelled every day to be the amazing and the best Dr. Lee you can be for your ancestors and your future prodigy, what would it be?
just one word. I'm like,
Yeah,
so how's that going to work?
have as many as you like.
I I pray that peace will be with us and that we will bring about positive change,
Yes.
purpose, and passion.
All right, positive change with purpose and passion. You heard it first here. We will be here to support you and can't wait to hear about your journey and check in on Dr. Lee. I know your campaign is going to be amazing and successful. Let us know if the coalition can help. We appreciate your honesty, your transparency, and your heartfelt commitment to change the community that you grew up in by being so present.
Thank you. Let me
Yes.
just add this. I saw Catherine Haynes put in a comment, and she is the person that called and asked me if I would run. Thank you,
Oh,
Catherine.
wonderful. She said, so exciting. That's what she said. So I'm sure she's looking forward to seeing all of this greatness. Thank you, Catherine, for putting this seed in our Dr. Lee. And we know you'll be there to support her.
I never would have thought.
Thank- That's what we like about leadership. Hi, Catherine. Do you want to say anything?
I'm in the limelight a lot, so I think not, and it was just really exciting to listen to Dr. Lee. So I'm fired up.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you for your inspiration. We are so grateful for it. Thank you, Coalition of 100 Black Women, and those who follow us on Facebook. Please share this video recording. For those that are thinking about leadership, on the verge of considering what and how to do it, please be compelled by what you hear and step into the place. Make the change. The water is warm. You will grow into amazing possibilities. So, again, thank you, everyone, and please have a good night. And we will keep you informed of our next program. We don't have an ad up this time, but we will next time. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Anything you want
Thank
to say, Janera?
Actually, Shantae, did you want? I do have an ad, so let me just share
Okay,
that
go.
really quickly.
Good.
And Shantae, did you have some closing
Thank
comments?
you. We do have it.
Yes, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Laurinette Lee, Dr. Sonia Banks. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for inspiring us to lead. Leadership is important on many different levels, So it's very important that we stay engaged and we stay informed. And I would hope that you would join us next week on March 22nd for our next program, Women's History Month, a conversation about Black women of faith and social justice, featuring Jennifer Jones Austin. She is the CEO of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. So hope to see you next week.
Wonderful.
All right.
Please don't miss it. Thank you so much. Great.
you.
Take good care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everyone.